So, yeah, hi everyone. I know my topic is advanced React patterns, but I think there's enough energy now because you already had a coffee, right? And let's do some yoga. Everyone, stand up. Yeah, I want everyone to stand up. Woo! Yeah, maybe this. Don't fall, don't fall. Stiff. Okay, cool down. And yeah, you can sit, yeah. Okay. The reason I did that is because I always compare doing yoga with doing some advanced patterns. Like you cannot learn the hardest posture in yoga the one day, right? You start with basics and then you reach a level where it's like, oh my God, look at him. So yeah, that's how you compare and that's how I compare basically. So yeah, after a few days of yoga, you might end up discovering your own pattern, something like this. Yeah? Okay. So everyone here wants to be an awesome developer, right? Yeah? Yes, no, yes? Yeah? So yeah, so to be an awesome developer today, we're gonna do some advanced stuff. So we're gonna learn some advanced React patterns. How many of you are like using React? Okay, okay. Vue? Okay, okay, cool, nice. So it's enough for the number. I think advanced React patterns will give you some knowledge about it. So it's highly inspired from the Superman, which is not a Superman, he's Ken Dots. He actually came up with this stuff. And yeah, I mean, he's great. He does all of this awesome stuff. And yeah, before we do that, I'm Manjula, and I'm basically a software consultant now at Talent Wonder, which is outsourcing company. And I'm also a lecturer at Code University Berlin. I teach React, JavaScript, so yeah, that's about me. Okay, so let me ask you this question. When you start learning React, like basically that happened with me, so I'm sure that happened with you as well. When you start learning React, it's day 0 and you're like, oh God. And then day 1, I want to throw off my laptop. Okay, let's see what's with the day 2. You start with hello world, yeah? And then, oh my God, I did this. Okay, and let's see what is day 5. So you start with like some counter example, and then I want more. I want to learn more. Yeah, fine, I want to learn more. That's how I started learning React advanced patterns. And day 7 for me is this. You see the guy calling, hey, I want some food, but I'm just busy in the React zone. Yeah? Okay, so to start with, we start with compound components. So what are compound components are basically, it's a set of patterns that works together, but still the state and they still share the state between them. That means, what I mean by this is, it encloses the state and the behavior for the group of components, but still gives the rendering control to the parent. Which means, I know it looks weird and whatever I'm saying, it's all bouncer, but let me say. So think of something like select and option. So if select and option are kept apart, they won't work. But if they work together, like select and then you have option, 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 they work really great. So that's how you can think of compound components. They work together. You have a parent component and you have several child components, and the state is being shared between them, and all of the rendering control, the power is still with the parent. So something, if you've come across this thing called semantic UI React, That's all about compound components. So you see form.group is a parent, and form.input, form.select, form.buttons are just the children of form.group, but all of the control is still with the form.group. Let me show you an example. So this is like building a group of radio buttons where radio group is a parent, and that does on change. It's like basically setting your state based on the value that radio option has. And radio option has like AM, FM, and whatever you want to have. Now, what you do is you basically define your radio options, and on click you get things from the props. And now your radio group is basically doing all of the stuff. So you see in the render, you basically say, hey, react.children. So react.children is an API from React. So if you see the React docs, it's an API from React that says you can, it's an utility function basically that you can access for playing around with your this.props.children. So basically all of the children, if you want to play around with them, you can use react.children. And what you do here is you basically map around them. It's equivalent to what you do in array.map. And then you say, OK, react.clone element, and you pass in the child, and you pass in all of the props that you need. So in my case, I need is selected and on click. And you say, OK, I want to basically return all of the children. There are some problems to it. Thanks to Eves, and whatever flip, I'm going to show that on Code Sandbox. So you see this radio group, as I said, that it has state, select, render, and basically in the render you try and basically map all your children and then say react.clone child. Okay, fine, I understand it. Now let's go here. Now if you see here, if I add an extra div around any of the children components, it creates a problem. Like, let me show you what is happening. So if you see here things, as soon as I click on something, it just works like a radio button. As soon as I click on something, you see the value here. But if you see with AM, the first option, it doesn't work. Because for this, the children now is the div. It's no longer the radio option. So that's where the problem is with compound components. Now let's see how we solve it. So the way we solve it is using flexible compound components. That's the name. So don't go with the name. Just try to understand what we're trying to show here. Compound component says, hey, OK, fine. We were doing stuff wrongly before, but now I give you a React context API to work together with the compound components so that you can share the state using context API. So what you do there is you basically, it's basically called a better version of compound components. You basically go and create your context. You go and say, OK, fine, I created the context, and now I need a provider. The provider is basically where you are going to provide all of the values that you need. So in my case, I would need the value on select, and I would need to render all the props.children. Now this is a provider basically, but I need a consumer. So consumer says, OK, I created a consumer function where I say radio group context is a consumer. I'm passing the props to it. And if there is a context, everything is fine. Render props.children. If not, give me an error. And now how would you use this function? The way you would use it is something like this. So you would say radio group consumer. Now here, the pattern is good because you have the context for each of the children. Even if you change your structure, it doesn't matter. Even if you add 3 divs around your radio option, it really doesn't matter. Because each of the children have their own context. So here, the value and the onSelect, you do the same thing, and it works fine. So let me show you an example that does the same thing. hope it's visible. Okay. So if you go here and we see it already has the div, and even if I put one more random div or one more random div, it doesn't matter, simply because each of the consumer are the children and they have their own context. So it works fine. And let's show you, and you have the value. Next, we move on to prop collection. Prop collection is a pattern where we can access props from the parent component by passing simply the single object. That means something like this. Let's say you have a get input props, which is from some random parent, and you want to pass it to any of your child. That means to your children, let's say here input, you would do something like this, spreading your props, get input props. And now let's say, so now here this is fine. I mean, I have achieved something, like I'm spreading the props and this can be used in that component. But let's say this props, if you see, this object also has onChange property. So now let's say you are implementing it in your children, like you're implementing in your child component in your input, and you want to basically implement your own onChange method. So what you would do? In this case, you would do something like this. So you would say, okay, fine, spread rest of the props, and basically I want the onChange method that is to be implemented in my input. I mean, I want to basically override the onChange method. I would do something like this, which is messier because what's happening is I have to externally provide the onChange method. Like I'm not passing it via props. I'm basically externally giving it the value. Also, the handler needs to be passed. So if you see, onChange handler is passed. And there's one more thing that's happening here is if you want to implement your own stuff, you have to extract the parent method. That means the parent onChange method. And then you have to write your own custom method. That, let's say, my onChange method is the custom thing that you're trying to do in your input. So you also have to pick up that, and then you have to basically override your method. That's a problem. That's really a problem. I don't want to do so many things. Instead, there's a solution to a problem. I would do something like this. So these are called prop getters. So instead of spreading an object, I would spread a function call, in which what I can do is I can basically add our custom props, and this will be merged by the default props which already the component has. So something like this. So this is a better solution. I would do something like this. So get input props, and I would pass the onChange, and onChange method is the custom method that I want to implement for this component. Now, once I did this, now it's up to the parent component to provide the mechanism, whether you're calling the internal or you're calling the supplied method. So you can, it depends on the parent. Next is state reducer. I really like this pattern because I don't hate Redux. I love Redux. Yeah. So this is something similar to, you can compare it with the reducer function in Redux. So it says that, you know, you can use it in a similar pattern. How many of you have worked with Redux? Okay, so it's similar to the reducer function in Redux. What it does is, it's basically, if you want to basically update anything in your component, it will take the previous state and it will also take the current state and merge it. So it's very simple. There are a lot of advantages. It's like you are using the same component and not changing the existing API, and you're looking for a workaround to basically change your, like, update your state. So that's the advantage. There can be two use cases for it where you could go with this pattern. It's like if you want to extend your API for state changes and never ever touch your current functionality, you should go with this use case. Next could be if you want to really use multiple reducers. So let me show you this pattern. So this is a simple example where I'm just trying to play around with simple form component. So, okay. So the good thing here is it's just this part. If you see this part, the way it's written, so I have a form component which does all of the stuff, like if it has an checkbox, if it is an input, that takes care of all of the stuff. But here's the code that you would see. Like this is the code that looks like basically the reducer function in Redux. So it says, okay, when I have a case form input, and when I have a case checkbox, return previous state and the next state. So basically what I was trying to do here is I'm basically just trying to check the value here in the JSON, and on the basis of click or not click, I'm just trying to update the state as well. So this is how state reducers look like, and if you see what's happening in here is you have the state reducer. You've basically done all the cases based on whatever cases you want. Now this gives you an isolated thing. So if you see my form is lying here, and you do all of the stuff in the form, which is like a logic to you, and this is like an UI to me. So you also do the separation of UI and your logic. Okay. Next use case would be when you want to use multiple reducers. So it's not the actual reducer of the Redux, but it's just the pattern that we write. So let's say it's a similar example, but a little bit more twisted. So it's something like I have two reducers here, and I basically combine it above. So the first reducer is simply how it was before. It was returning us the state. The second is the uppercase. So anything I write in the input should be an uppercase. So this is useful when you want to deal with multiple reducers. Say I want to do something, I want to update my component based on certain conditions. So this could be used as a pattern. Cool. So we move ahead. And yeah, that's higher order components. I think everybody knows. Each of the slide has yoga posters. It's because I love yoga. Okay. So yeah, higher order components. It's like function accepts a component, and it returns you some enhanced version of your component by adding some props to it. So you can think of it as a connect method of React and Redux, or with router of React router DOM. So let's say something like this. Everybody does the fetch call in their applications, right? So this is a simple example of it. Let's say I want to make a fetch HOC. So I would do something like this. I would say, okay, fine, it has a loading, data, error, and if it's loading, show me the loading. If it's data, return me the data with an li, or return null. And what I do with this is, now if you see fetch HOC, it is a function that accepts a component. So let me show you the fetch HOC. So the fetch HOC does nothing, but it simply makes an API call and handles all the state that's happening here. So if you see here also, we have the thing that the UI, the logic is separated from the UI. So this is how we use higher order components. I'm not against using it, but there's a problem that I need to tell you. Because let's say you have something like this. Fetch HOC, and you have the prop data URL, and you pass the app, and you do the same thing again with the second URL. That's called prop collision. So the first one will work, and the second one won't work. It's because you have the same data prop with the same name, and you cannot do that. So that's where it fails. Let me show you one more example. So let's say you have two HOCs. You have one named HOC and you have one some with wish HOC. And it has the same wrapped component and it has the same data prop data. Now what will happen here is basically your data will be overridden by named HOC. So there's a problem again, right? Yeah, so how should we go ahead? I mean, I say that use HOC pattern, but be aware of what side effects it is giving you. Yeah, I mean, it's not right or wrong. It depends. But to solve this problem, we have render props. Now, what render props does is basically they are simply props that accept a function. Also, they separate your logic from UI. That means you basically decide how the UI will be rendered. So let's take an example. I basically relate this example to the Apollo query component for GraphQL. So let's take an example of building a fetch API through render prop. This is what I would do. I would create a fetch class, extends components. In the component did mount, I would basically play around with the set state. And yeah, done. Now let's look at what my fetch API would look like. So fetch API would look something like this. This is where render prop comes to rescue, and we won't face the problem that we were facing with HOC. So, and also, Michael Jackson, in one of his tweets, said that I can do anything you're doing with your HOC using a regular component with a render prop. So, I mean, you can use render prop because it will do anything that HOC is doing. So, it depends on the use case. The provider component is not very complex. It's the new React new context API that is come up in 16.4. And basically, the reason they got it because they didn't want it to do a lot of prop drilling. So what we do is we do something like this. You create a context, and you have a provider, and you have a consumer. The provider says, OK, I give you the value. The consumer says, OK, I accept the value. So this is how you do. Basically, it's necessary that you provide something. If you're providing with a provider, you have to mention it using value equal to, because when you take it from the context, it only reads that value. So the consumer will only read all of your values here, and now you can basically consume all of your values that you're trying to do, that you're trying to basically access. So this was the major relief of prop drilling. I mean, if prop drilling is something like if I need to pass my data from first level to the fourth level, I have to like go from first, second, third, and fourth. Instead of doing that, I just say, OK, I have a provider component that is like available, and I can send data at any level. That becomes my consumer, basically. OK, so that was about patterns. I've discovered few best practices. Like I've been working with React for almost like 2 years. So these are the best practices that I discovered it myself. It's up to you to use it or not. Function in set state. This is what I like. And why I like is because I think function in set state, when you do something like this, let's say this dot state, counter, and you say this dot state plus counter plus plus plus. Now what happens here, if you don't use function in set state, your this dot state dot counter might end up having stale values. Because what happens is, whenever your state updates, let's say this is an interaction which is taking like 6, 7, or 10 times, because it's the interaction, and I can do that. User can do that. I want to keep doing. You can do that. But what will happen now is your React has not completed the life cycle. That means the component is not yet re-rendered. And that means this value which is present in the state is not the updated one. If you use something like this, it says that You pass a function in the set state. That means I'm also providing you the updated value of the component. So you can use this. That means you don't have to depend, okay, React, do the life cycle, the component is rendered, and now I'm fetching the value. You don't really have to depend on that, and everything is sorted because it already has the updated value of the component as a parameter. So state is nothing but that. Okay, so unwanted updates. Let's say I have a parent component, I have a child component, and that child component is simply a pure function, like nothing is happening there. But it still updates, right? It still updates. I don't want to do that. What should I do? Here's a solution. There's a library called Why Did You Update? And that's what it does. It basically puts your console on blast whenever there is any unwanted updates. To show you an example, like before I show you an example, this is how you do it. You basically have to, it's an NPM package, so you basically have to install it via NPM or yarn. And you go and say, okay, if your environment is not production, be sure that it is not production. You shouldn't be doing it in your production environment. So if it's not production, go and require this and pass your React to why did you update. And now what happens, let me show you an example. So let's say I have a component called class app, and basically what is happening here, I've tried and set this initial state, and on the update, I basically try and change the name. But I also have a component which is like pure. I mean, that's not doing anything. That's not updating anything. It's just using this prop, initial prop, and trying to show in the UI. I don't want that to update. But if you see, the moment I click on update name, my console will start bloating, and it will say that the unnecessary updates is happening. And also, I have made sure that I have the why did you update thing. So let me, and you see, yeah, that's the warning. It says that something wrong is happening. Now you have to discover which component is doing the unnecessary update. So simply, for me, I go to component here, and if you see this component is passed here, so this is passed here, and now I know for sure that this is a pure function, I mean not pure function, pure class, which is kind of just returning the age and not doing any state update, but still it is re-rendering because the parent is re-rendering. So what I would do is, to get rid of this, I would do something like this. And the moment you do this, let's update, I see nothing. So that means my child is not getting updated now. So you can use it and it's not the only way. You can also use should component update. So should component update is a lifecycle in React which returns true or false. And if it returns true, that means your child will re-render. If it returns false, your child will not re-render. So you could also use that. This is one of the solutions that you could use. Let's go back to the slide. So this is like tree structuring and spreading your props. So something like this. I wouldn't do this way because I think that's like ugly. I would do something like this, spreading your props. And by destructuring, I mean whenever, let's say I want to exclude something, some of the prop that I don't want to send to the component, I would do something like this. I would destructure it and I would pass it to the component, the required prop. Runtime checking with props. This is one of the good things. You can basically say npm install prop types, and these are basically used to check your data types of the props or whether it is required or not. It's like validating your props. Type checking with props, you could go and read this article. This is one of the good articles. They have it on internet. Using default props, you could also use default props because sometimes you really don't have any value and you want something to be shown when nothing has been there. So you could use default props. This is my favorite. Using display name, I think, so if let's say if I create a component and if I try to see this in React DevTools, I will be able to see you with the same name. That is my component, right? But let's say I have a functional component. I will not be able to see it in React DevTools. So if I use display name, you'll be able to see the component name with the same name that you provided to the display name in the React DevTools. This is actually a relief because when you're debugging, it really helps. It also helps when you're dealing with HOCs. So let's say you have something wrapped. So it will show you the default name provided by the HOC. But if you provide a display name, it will actually show you the display name that you provided. Conditional rendering, it's not very cool, but yeah, people normally use it. So I would do something like this when I have to do some conditional renderings. Let's check out this. Conditional rendering in array. So how many of you would do the first one? That's on the first one? Come on, raise. How many of you would do the first one if you want to check the conditional rendering in array? The first one, how many of you would do that? Perfect. That is correct. It's because my array.length can be 0 sometimes, and it will still be true, right? And that's a common mistake that we make. So not using that. Yeah. Okay. This is one more way you could do it. You would say boolean my array.length. And true, it basically checks for length as well. So you could do something like this as well. So you know why I've created a repo for this. If you try to find out the patterns, the advanced patterns that people are using in React, it's not available on internet. And I really found this pain because anyone who's searching about this is simply find some tutorials that is made by Cantods, thanks to him. But we really don't have anything that direct us, like as a developer, maybe somebody is just starting off. So I created a repo, and I mean, people are using it a lot. I see a lot of people are actually using it when they don't understand any stuff. They're going to the repo, and if you find anything that's good enough, that a pattern that you discovered, send a PR. Yeah. So I would like to conclude. No one is an expert. I'm not an expert. But we all learn from each other, right? And so keep learning. Don't stop. Keep sharing. Don't stop. Ask for help when you need. Like when you're stuck, don't be shy to ask for help. There are people around. Just ask them. They'll help you. So it relates to Kidze's talk in the morning. Awesome developer is equal to awesome money plus self-satisfaction. And yeah, thank you so much.